Get the session started. Thank you very much. We still have quite a few folks that are joining, but in the interest of time, we would like to go ahead and get started. Thank you again, everyone, for joining the session on getting your CMMC certification across the finish line. Obviously, a very relevant topic today in light of a lot of the world events that are taking place. Many of you may have recently seen last Sunday's 60 Minutes segment on the Shields Up segment hosted by and talking a lot about CISA and the need for all of us, whether we are a provider, a commercial provider or a Defense Department provider, to be on our toes as we should be expecting imminent cyber attacks. And obviously with the CMMC process, the focus on that is making sure that those that are servicing our military and the military themselves have the best cyber posture available to protect our valuable assets. So my name is Tom Leahy. I have worked in the compliance, security, and risk areas for close to 30 years. Very relevant topic for us. We provide at SureShield, I'm the SVP of SureShield, and we provide technology solutions that focus in three specific areas: security, compliance, and integrity. Steve, if you could go on to the next slide. This is we provide a platform that helps enable companies, partners that we work with to make this process a little bit easier, yet very comprehensive. So we provide solutions that help with security, vulnerability scanning, ethical hacking processes, compliance-related solutions that help streamline the whole process around meeting various types of compliance frameworks, and then tools on the integrity side that help make sure that organizations are not working with banned vendors or banned employees or the likes. Today, our primary presenter is Steve Rutkovitz. Steve is the head of Choice Cybersecurity. We've been a partner with Steve, enabling the services that he provides with supportive technology. And again, in a lot of this, it's a combination technology in and of itself. Oftentimes is not the answer. Steve has worked with us for close to 10 years and has a lot of experience, and will speak to his experience on how to help you or your organization that's helping others meet the impending CMMC requirements, and of course, helping understand how to meet the current NIST 800-171 requirements. So with that, Steve, I'd like to turn it over to you to introduce yourself, your company, and then go into the relevant topics. A couple of things before I do so, just as to point out to the folks who are here, you will be receiving this content at the conclusion of this webinar, as well as the audio portion and video portion of this webinar. We will, at the end of the session, take Q&A. We'd ask you to go to the Q&A section of Zoom to ask your questions. We also will take a couple of pauses as we go through the presentation to take some very brief polls to get an understanding of where you or your company is at in this process. And we will also, at the conclusion of this session, be offering a poll that will allow you to schedule a one-on-one consultation time with the team at Choice Cybersecurity. So with that, Steve, let me turn it over to you and appreciate your time in conducting this session.
Thank you, Tom, and welcome. I own and operate a successful MSP business for over 20 years in the Maryland, DC area, designed and supported IT systems for many government contractors. In 2017, we spun off Choice Cybersecurity to be a pure play compliance and cybersecurity company. We are a services company and work with software companies like SureShield to provide end-to-end solutions. We provide over 15 different compliances, but NIST 171 and CMMC is our primary compliance, representing over 50% of our business today. 80% of our business is partnering with MSPs, MSSPs, and 20% is direct to companies with in-house IT departments. We have performed over 250 risk assessments worldwide, and we believe that really understanding risk and doing very thorough risk assessments is really the key to helping companies become secure and compliant. Our goal is to simplify all things relating to compliance and security for our clients and MSP partners. We are certified as both RPOs and RPs, which I'll tell you more about later, and our company is ISO 27001 certified. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the top drivers that are driving the CMMC Compliance 2.0 and break it down. These are the top drivers, but not all the drivers. So the DoD is requiring all primes and subcontractors to register and upload their score and POAM to the SPRS website. So the DoD is requiring all primes and subcontractors to be compliant. Agencies and primes are requiring you to fill out questionnaires and testify that you have a proof of compliance in place now for the NIST 171. So we're getting a lot of questionnaires from the primes to fill out for our subs to make sure and prove that compliance is in place right now. You have a mandatory CMMC compliance that's coming out in July. They're going to define a little bit more, but right now you have to have the NIST 171 in place. New contracts are going to have in the actual contract the CMMC compliance. You can bid on as many contracts as you want, but in order to get contracts going forward, you're going to have CMMC compliance if you have CUI markings in your documents. And again, so it'll be some self-assessment, but it looks like they're going to be ratcheting things up, and quite a few companies are going to have a CMMC audit. As defense contractors, you are a security target. There's no question about it. Between Russia, China, North Korea, you're going to see an uptick in cyber attacks, and we want to help you kind of button things up so you know, you're not an easy target and that it's going to be very difficult to penetrate or breach your systems. The other big driver that we're seeing is a lot of the contractors we're working with also have things like ITAR. They also have 889B requirements, so I'll tell you more about ISO 27001, GDPR for doing work in Europe. So we want to help companies with their total risk, not just their CMMC compliance when we're doing it. It's going to be factor in other compliances that they may need. And with that, we'll stop and take a poll.
Yeah, and Steve, I'm just going to pause for a minute with the audience and take a brief poll. As he pointed out, obviously, those of you that are either helping service the supply chain or are a supplier themselves have requirements for doing the NIST 800-171 assessment, as Steve indicated. And very soon on the heels of that, you will be moving into this process of having to become CMMC compliant. So we wanted to just get a sense with the folks that are here, first of all, those that have already submitted an assessment score to the SPRS. If you have, please go ahead and enter that into the poll. And as it relates to CMMC, knowing that there's still some final rules that are planned to be in place, you know, what is your plan in terms of timing for beginning to enter that process of becoming CMMC compliant? And there's quite a few folks that are answering here. So we're just going to let this go about another 20 seconds, Steve, and then we'll move on. It looks like with the answers we have here, about, I would say about 60% of the participants who have answered have actually submitted an initial score on the NIST program. And then I would say, Steve, close to 50% of the folks that are responding here are intending to become, at least plan on wanting to become compliant between 0 and 12 months, with a large percentage of that, actually almost 70% within the next 12 months, and over 50% within the next 0 to 3.
Great, that's good to hear. Okay, so let's talk a little about the anatomy of the actual CMMC body. And again, we spent a lot of time with this, with the accreditation body. So I think it's important to understand how it was set up and kind of the background. The DoD actually set up an independent accreditation body to actually start doing these audits. And they use something called the ISO 17021. The 17021 is a worldwide accepted framework for setting up an accreditation body. So that's the actual framework that they use. There's all kinds of requirements in there. The biggest requirement is there has to be a separation of duty. So what they set up is RPOs. RPOs are registered provider organization. That's a company level. We're certified as an RPO. And then individuals are set up as RPs, or registered practitioners, that can help defense contractors get ready to be for the audits. That's the readiness side. Then on the other side of the fence, you have what's called a C3PAO. That's the company that's certified to do the audits, and then they hire or they have training for auditors or assessors that are actually under them. You have to have a separation, and there has to, like the fox can't watch the hen house. So if we do the readiness work, we can't do the audit, and vice versa, right? Because it has to be an independent. So the majority of our work right now is getting companies ready, but we're working with a lot of assessors because there's a lot of benefits to understanding how these audits are done. So we're certified right now as RPO. We are approved as 3 CPAOs, and we're working through that process as well. So what's new with the CMMC 2.0? When they first came out, I'll call it the CMMC 1.0, there was actually 5 levels. Depending on how much CUI you have, or what type of information, or what kind of contracts you're bidding on, you had to come under the 5 different levels. They've actually changed that in the last few months to CMMC 2.0, and there's 3 levels. They're also only doing audits for level 2 right now. Level 2 is how much CUI you have, controlled unclassified information. Again, I'll tell you more about it later, but most companies we work with dozens and dozens, seem to fall under a level 2. Contracts are starting to specify that you have a NIST 171. So the interim rule is you have to have a NIST 171 in place now in order to maintain or get any new contracts. In July, they're going to come out with specifics of the new CMMC 2.0, and they're going to start rolling into the contracts shortly after. Now, you can bid on contracts, but again, you can't get a contract unless you have met whatever level under certification to actually get awarded the contract and maintain the contract. Primes are requesting this 171s. We're seeing a lot of requests from the primes. You know, this CMMC 2.0 is almost 6 months old, and you're supposed to have everything in place within 3 months. So the requiring scores to be close to 110, which is the highest score. And the big thing about the CMMC is it's not just okay to have a NIST 171 and check the controls. You also now have to have evidence. You have to have evidence for all 110 controls. It's a lot of work to do it, but you have to have evidence. And the audits will be required for some level 2s and all level 3s. So some level 2s will actually be self-assessments, but it looks like the majority are going to also need an audit as well. And what I'm hearing is they're actually going to be ratcheting things up a little bit because of all the things going worldwide. And a lot of the contractors will also need to do what's called a NIST 172A. The NIST 172A is NIST 171 plus some additional controls to actually protect the CUI. So right now, like I said, the mandatory is in NIST 171 with 110 controls, and the highest scores are 110, the lowest scores are negative 103. We try to get, when we do our assessments with clients, we try to get scores in that are in the pluses because they don't really say anything, but you know, I'm just careful that if you have too low of a negative number, it could be held against you. What I normally see is if you have kind of a C plus average and working on a POAM, or plan of actions and milestones, to get the rest of the controls in place, usually you can get a conditional compliance where they'll allow you to keep the contracts and actually get new contracts. Now, you also have to have what's called an SSP. That's a system security plan. So the first thing we do is we assess against the controls. Then we have to build out an SSP. The SSP is all 110 controls, exactly how you're going to be implementing those controls, your evidence and dates that were installed. The plan of actions and milestones are just the missing controls or your gaps. And then you have to have a milestone dates of when they're being implemented. And once you do your plan, your your risk assessment that has to be in place in 180 days. That's 180 days are pretty much up. So that's why you want to try to get these things completed. So the certification process. So the way it works is you first have the assessment. You got to understand the gaps. You got to then put a plan in place with your POAM to get the remediations, execute on the remediations, get that in place, get all your evidence in place. And there's 3 different types of evidence, but you have to have your evidence in place for every control. Then you become like audit ready. So you know your 110 controls are in place. You have all your evidence, all your technologies, everything's in place. And then we normally take a client through a mock audit. A mock audit is running through it the way an auditor would run it, because remember, we were also trained as auditors, and then we bring in the actual auditor. Now, what's interesting about the certifications, and we learned this from SOC audits and for ISO 27001 audits, is these auditors usually bill by the hour. So the more ready that you are for the audit, the less time it takes for the auditor. So we're working with some 3 CPAOs right now to understand our process to really bring the cost down of an audit. So we don't know the exact number that an audit's going to be for either your client or for your contract as a subcontractor, but we do know that the more ready it is, the less it'll cost. You know, we used to see audits come in that weren't organized, didn't have the right evidence in place, a lot of back and forth. You know, I've seen them as low as 10,000 and move up to 40,000 or 4 times as much if it's not ready when you're ready to get audited. So we developed a 3-step process, and we now have a worldwide service mark on this process. It's called assess, address, and maintain. So we start off with the gap assessment, and we do a very thorough job really looking at a company's total risk. Then once we understand the risk and we have the POAM, we implement the controls, usually with either a managed service provider or an in-house IT, and also the client collaboratively to get those controls in place to bring your business up to an acceptable level of risk. And then once it's in place, we have to put in controls and things to make sure you don't fall backward. You want to maintain it so you don't fall backward. This is a repeatable process that we've kind of perfected over time called assess, address, and maintain. So the first step in the assessment is we work with SureShield's portal, and we pull up the framework that is required. In this case, it's NIST 171 is most of what we're doing right now. And we actually walk the client through all the good things they have in place, and we're looking for the things that are missing. So here in this sample, we have compliant 44 controls, we're missing 66. We also want to pull in all the evidence, policies, procedures, anything that could be evidence as well. And we want to start building out this documentation. And now we have a way of managing it in the SureShield portal, what's in place and what's missing. And now we have a way to actually do a gap analysis around the actual controls. Now, once we do the initial assessment, the system automatically prints out a score. Now, in this case, you're seeing a 67 against the 800-171. So we kind of have, again, like a C+ average, and we know we have some things to work on. So when we go to the SPRS website, we can put a score in of 67 and a POAM date of maybe within 90 days down the road and buy a little time. And then we can upload and change these scores on a regular basis and keep increasing them upward as we knock out these controls. Also in the SureShield portal, per compliance are all the policies that you need, but they're in a template format and they have to be customized. So when we do the risk assessment, we're also assessing any policies that are in place right now. And we're looking, we can sometimes pull them out of an employee manual. If you have policies anywhere in your organization, we're going to grab them to try to, you know, not have to reinvent the wheel. And we'll do a gap analysis against your policies. When we do a gap analysis, sometimes you need new policies you didn't have before. Sometimes you have to edit what you have. And sometimes we can use the policies that you have. But the policies are really important to have in place because, you know, employees do what they think is best if they're not trained. But when they have policies and procedures and they're trained, they're going to do what the organization expects them, and it's going to make sure you're safe and compliant. The next thing we do, this is one of the biggest questions that we're asked, is what level am I? 1, 2, or 3? Do I have CUI? nobody really knows the data inside their network. So inside of SureShield, there's actually a CUI scanner or a controlled unclassified information. Now people say, what's controlled unclassified information? Well, there's actually 400 markings that the government has for CUI. And probably the best analogy I heard was, if, let's say you're a landscaper for the White House, and you have the blueprints for the White House and they're very detailed. It's not top secret, but if those documents get out, somebody could use that to, do some kind of harm to the White House. So that's controlled unclassified information. A lot of what I see in the manufacturing sector are manufacturers making parts with CAD drawings, and they might have, let's say a part for a landing gear. If the Chinese hack 3 or 4 companies, they can then assemble that and put together a whole landing gear. That's CUI. So it's not top secret, it's controlled unclassified information. And this is really why the government is really put together this whole CMC, is protect this CUI. And that's why you're going to see more around the NIST 172A, because it adds some more CUI controls. And it's our job to kind of anticipate for you what's coming down the road, so we're always one step ahead. So in this case, we're actually scanning for the CUI. We can also scan for ITAR. We can scan for personal identifiable information. But CUI is lots of different categories. Like here is NNP, nuclear propulsion. There's no foreign. So these documents are marked by the government, and we're able to scan them. So once we scan them and we can say, hey, you have CUI, then we know we're level 2. If we scan and we don't see any CUI data, then we can be in a level 1. We only need a self-assessment. So we're getting better and better at understanding your systems in the discovery phase to help make sure you're, on the right road for compliance or self-assessment. So the next tool that we've been using inside of SureShield is an active vulnerability scan. What an active vulnerability scan does, it simulates an actual attack on your network, external and internally. So this is the things that a hacker is looking for, but we're looking for it before they get to your systems. So we know that the majority of the hacks have to do with either operating system or software vulnerabilities. That's what the actual hackers exploit. So this scanner can actually simulate and authenticate on your system and look for all the critical high and very high vulnerabilities. Once we see that, we can then push out the reports to IT, MSP, whoever's doing your IT systems, and then we can have them button things up. The tighter we have this, and the more we keep up with this, this is a huge defense against risk, because even if something bad gets in, it can't launch, right? So a lot of the controls, about 4 or so controls in the NIST 171, has to do with managing vulnerabilities. Then once we know what the vulnerabilities are and they're remediated, we can start running reports that make this part of the evidence for the auditors, so we can give them a before and after picture. It's not only good for your compliance. We just went to renew our cyber insurance. It actually renewed yesterday, and I had to put out a report that we had 0 vulnerabilities on our system that were critical or high, or they weren't going to give us insurance. So we're starting to see other factors weigh in why it's so important to make sure that the discovery is done and that these things are buttoned up. But in this case, you're seeing if you apply 20 fixes, these 161 devices, you'll reduce your risk by 93%. This is a pretty good report to show the auditor. If I was to move it up to 30, let's say, I can get closer to 100%. And then we can kind of show the actual before and after pictures, additional evidence to see, okay, we first scanned on a date, we had these vulnerabilities, we fixed them, we rescanned, and then we can show them that the criticals and highs are gone. And this is the kind of information that these auditors are trained to actually look for. Okay. Now, this is not part of the compliance, but this is part of the SureShield scanner. This is a pretty important scanner. This is called the 889B rule. And this is basically the sanctions list or the blacklist. Most of them have to do with Chinese companies. So there's about a little more than a handful of companies that are on the 889B sanction list. We believe there'll be Russian companies, a lot more companies will be added to this over time, but the scanner can actually go out and look. The reason you want a scanner is a lot of these things are in chips. It's not like a Lenovo box where you know it's a Chinese manufacturer. A lot of cameras, phones, process control equipment have these Chinese chips inside of it, and they're banned from the US from using them. So I don't know if the auditor is actually going to be looking at this, but it's important that we actually run this scan as well, just to make sure that you're compliant with the US government. Now, this isn't a specific DoD requirement, it's across the entire government. So if you have other government contracts, you may have other commercial contracts. It's also for critical infrastructure, even if you're a commercial company. So it's a good thing to run across your whole business, just to make sure that we don't have any of these companies' systems in place. Okay, so once we do the risk assessment, and again, it's a lot more involved. We look at like vendor management, we look at the Active Directory, we get pretty deep into the systems, but this kind of gave you kind of a summary of some of the things we do in the risk assessment phase. Once we collect all this data, now comes the hard part. And this is where a lot of companies get tripped up. You have to be able to figure out where you're at right now. What is your current security stack? If you're an MSP, we look at your security stack to try to build on top of what you have. If we're working directly with a contractor, we have to look at all the different layers of security they have in place and then build on top of that. And then these security layers have to match the compliance, and we have to start getting things aligned. So most of the times when we come in, most companies have the basics in place. And I'll call that basic security. They have a decent firewall or next-gen firewall. They have decent antivirus protection, patch management, the basics, the good backups. But we have to look a little deeper and make sure that all these things can actually meet the compliance. And we're looking more for the security 2.0 things around two-factor authentication, mobile device management, encryption. Encryption has to be FIPS 140 encryption in order to meet the DoD requirements. So it's not just okay to have encryption, it has to be FIPS 140, so you have to look closely at that. The big thing now is cloud vendors, right? Most companies are moving to the cloud, but remember, if you're a DoD contractor and to meet CMMC compliance, your cloud vendor has to be FedRAMP compliant. FedRAMP is a requirement for any cloud vendor. Now, it only pertains to if you have CUI there. So let's say you have QuickBooks or something with no CUI, then we're not that concerned whether they're FedRAMP. But if you're using a product like Dropbox or something, and you're moving CUI data, we got to make sure they're FedRAMP compliant. So we have to look very closely at your network, who you're using, your vendors, and it's a pretty tall order with a lot of moving parts. Then we get into the compliance. We have to make sure there's user awareness training, phishing testing, change management. When things are changed, we're managing them. We have to have audit logs. We have to review those logs to show the auditors that these logs have been reviewed, who's logging into what and when, in case something forensics happens. Continuous vulnerabilities. So you have to kind of look at all the different pieces of a business, and it's as much of an art as it is a science. And because we've done this so many times, we're good at understanding the risk and then putting in practical solutions to try to really, keep these things affordable. One of the things we spent a lot of time with is Microsoft 365. There's probably 15 different versions you can get, but most of the companies we work with that are doing DoD work and have any type of CUI, we've been kind of steering them in the G, like G3 or G5. And then you try to build all the different features it has and then kind of add other solutions around it. So we're trying to really help companies provide these layers as affordable as possible. So when you do compliance, a lot of times people used to treat it like a technology project. It's really not. It has a technical, an administrative, and a physical component. And you really have to align the people, processes, and technology to do this properly. Our strength is really the administration piece. And you really have to have a team together to kind of make sure all this gets implemented properly and it's aligned. So just in summary, the assess, address, and maintain. On the assessment, we're going to identify the risk gap analysis. We're going to do the SSP, the plan of all the controls, and the POAM, plan of missing controls, upload the score, and now we have a game plan to go to the address. The address is executing the missing controls, making sure we have the documentation, vendor management. It's the execution of getting things ready to upload 110 score and or get ready for the audit. And then once everything's in place, we have to have a plan in place so we can maintain it. What I find is, this is a 3-year audit and it's an annual risk assessment. But if you don't look at it for a year, it's like a rope. It just kind of cords just start fraying, and just over time the cord snaps. It's like starting all over again. What we're finding is if you do a little bit each month and keep up with it, the cord just stays really tight all the time. So when we're talking about compliance, there's going to be 2 types of compliance, really, right? Some companies will just need to do a self-assessment and still have to go through the whole process, but won't have to worry about an auditor coming in really scrutinizing everything. In that case, we'll give a client actually what's called a medallion or a little badge that verifies that they have the CMMC and NIST 171 compliance in place. And they can show that badge, and they'll have reports to show that they're compliant. If with the certification, we'll help you through the process. We're working with several different auditors right now that understand our system, that'll give us lower prices for you because everything is going to be ready. So if you do need an audit, we'll help you all the way through the process. So, everybody asks me, how long does this take, right? So to do it right, it's going to take about 2 to 3 months for the assessment, the whole assessment phase. It usually takes 60 to 90 days. It just does. People say, can you do it in a couple of weeks? No, it takes 2 to 3 months to do it right. Because you got to build the whole SSP plan. You got to build the POAM. You got to start selecting products and services. All that's done up front in the assessment. And then it takes about 3 months to 6 months to actually implement the controls. A lot of this depends on how fast a company can make decisions. It depends on the resources you have. Let's say technically, we can move fast, but it's a team effort and we're collaborating. And usually we're doing the project management and the organization, but it's a collaborative approach. So I would say another 3 to 6 months there. And then we have at the end of this, about 30 to 60 days to get the audit done. So it can take as long as 9 months. So some of the companies right now that aren't sure whether they need it or not, you want to go where the puck's going. We want to start now to make sure we have everything ready in 9 months so you can bid on these contracts, get the contracts. And if you have a contract, you're not in jeopardy of getting it suspended. And the ongoing is different for each company. Sometimes companies say we got the wherewithal to kind of take it from here and do it in-house. And sometimes we offer kind of a continuous compliance to help companies maintain compliance. So we offer a service once companies are compliant or have things, when this 171 or the CMMC in place, and we call that continuous compliance services. There's still a lot of moving parts to keep up with, but if you do a little bit each month, and we usually budget around 8 hours or so for a client, but each month we prioritize, do we do the awareness training? Do we look at vendor management? Are we editing and changing updates to policies? Do we have a few new employees onboarding? There's always something to do to maintain compliance. And then we help you through that process. And we kind of schedule out for the year with like 2 month, like call them sprints or increments. And we find if you do a little bit each month, you stay compliant and you never fall backward. So we say it like takes a village. What we found is, in our travels and doing compliance, all across the North America, we've done some things internationally. I only seen a handful of times where one person has all the skill sets. Because you have this technology, administrative and physical components, it's a team. And we've developed a team of people at Choice Cybersecurity. We offer it as a team. So we have compliance officers that are trained and certified as RPOs. We have security analysts that look at the security. And the biggest thing, which is a secret sauce, is project management. We dedicate a project manager to every single client, and you have a lot of moving parts. So you have to kind of organize everything and be super organized and know how to move these balls and prioritize these tasks and work in a group. And usually we take on the project management role because we got to make sure you get across the finish line. So it's really a team. And we found this over time, but we now have what's called a pod, or every client is assigned a team of experts. So what path is right for you? When we look and talk to companies about compliance, they kind of come in like three different lanes. The first is do it for you. So do it for you is like Choice Cybersecurity, we do the lion's share of the work. We do the project management, control management, we create and build the evidence, develop the policies and procedures with our paralegals, and we do push out most of the training. We do the security analyst, and your MSP or IT staff would do the technical pieces, and we act more as the analyst, but we're doing a lion's share of the work. That's the do it for you model, and we offer that service. The do it with you model, we have several clients, especially MSPs and in-house IT. They want to do more of the scanning, more of the technical pieces. We might do the gap work. So if they're strong technically, we might work on the policies and the controls and maybe the training. But we have some partners we work with that also do the training. We'll do just the gap work. And I call that kind of the do it with you model. They're leveraging a lot of our training and knowledge around the compliance to speed things up, but they're doing a lot or a portion of the work. And then the third is to do it yourself. So there are companies that may have a compliance officer in IT in-house, and it's a do it yourself model. In that case, you just want to go to SureShield and license their software and use all the tools. And that's the do it yourself model.
Great. And Steve, we're just going to take given the variety of folks that we have in the audience, quick poll based upon that, whether kind of what you as a provider or a supplier think is going to be the way in which you'll go to meeting this compliance. And I'm going to launch that poll right now. Just give you a minute or so to answer what you think you or your company is going to process they'll follow. And we'll let you go ahead on in an answer. I'm going to give about another 30 seconds. And Steve, while we're doing that, just a quick question or maybe some insight from you. There's certainly been, you mentioned the more that you have in place ahead of time is most likely going to lower your costs. I've heard that they are going to, with the new CMMC, most likely be limiting the number of items that can actually even go on a POAM. They're going to reduce and have a very specific group of controls only that would be allowed to go on that. Obviously, if that is the case, I'm assuming you would say it would make more sense to get as many of those controls in place and not on a POAM ahead of time.
Yeah, I would say, so it's all building on each other. So the NIST 171 had 110 controls and you're allowed to have a POAM. It looks like they're moving to the NIST 172A for most level 2s, which will be another 20 or so controls. So you'd have to add those. And there's no POAM for CMMC. So the more controls you have in place now, the better, because you're just building. You're not going to lose anything. You're just going to be building on it. And the other thing is sometimes we work with clients, sometimes they're, they have very little done. Sometimes they have a decent amount done. And sometimes they show me and say, look, I've got everything in place. I'm ready for a mock audit. So we can help companies in any, kind of anywhere they're at in the process.
Great, great. So it looks like the majority of the folks that responded are either need the DIFY or the DIWY, and we'll share that with you as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so really in summary, we can help you meet and maintain compliance. If you're an MSP, we can help you with your client. If you're a direct defense contractor, we can help you with your meet and maintain compliance. And it's a lot to keep up with. Just the changes that happen inside of an organization with new employees and new IT, you got to keep up with these changes. But the bigger changes are coming from the DoD. I mean, the CMC already has like 3 or 4 vintages, and we are spending a lot of time just keeping up with all the requirements. And it's our job to kind of anticipate where things are going. We always want to be, anticipating to make sure that we're, planning and putting the right things in place. Again, we have a dedicated team of experts. You may need all of our experts, you may need certain experts, but again, we can either do all the services or we can do the gap work. And we want to help you, really build a total alignment of culture. It's a combination of technology, people, processes, technology, training. It all has to be aligned. And if you have it aligned, you're going to build a really strong culture of compliance, and not only have the compliance in place, but your company is going to be super secure, so you're not going to have the aggravation of cyber attacks. It's going to be very, unlikely. And then the other goal is we want to make sure they're practical, affordable solutions. We spend a lot of time with small to medium-sized companies, and one of the first things we talk about is, we got to be careful it doesn't cost a lot of money. We've been in situations time and time again where we lost to a competitor because they can't believe we can do it for that price. But we figured out how to bring a lot of the cost out of getting compliant because we're so focused and we do it over and over again. So our job is to make it a practical, affordable solution. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone very much for their time today. I'd like to turn it back over to Tom and let us know if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Great presentation. And again, I think given the events that are taking place today, it's just evident that this is going to get scaled up even more. The beginning of last year, there was a lot of questions because the government had gone back and made some changes to the CMMC process or the levels, which personally I think were good because it really aligned with, we know that the NIST 800-171 is a good process. It's following that process, which is the more important thing. And having some more restrictive oversight around that is important for the protection of these valuable assets we have here. And you can be sure that this is going to be moving forward. It's not going to be moving back again. So really helpful understanding how you can help others get themselves ready for this, because they're going to be expected to be ready if they want to gain those contracts in the future and maintain the ones they have now. So please, for the folks that are here, we thank you for joining. Down, if you go to the Q&A section of Zoom, you please go in to address any questions you may have. I'm going to launch one last poll that we will keep open during the Q&A session. And that's for those, if you would like to have a personal consultation with Choice to understand how they may be able to help you in this process, please go ahead and respond to that. And we will make sure that we have folks from Choice follow up with you personally to get this completed. So let me go into a couple of the questions that we have here. One is around the recording, for folks that are here. Yes, folks who are on this session, everybody will receive this recording as well as the content to this presentation. But I have one question here, Steve, around OCR scanning capability. Do you have OCR scanning capability?
Well, I'd like to know the specifics around it. Maybe get a little more questions. So the OCR scanning for scanning in, oh, I see, OCR scanning when you're scanning CUI. So the CUI scanner, yes, it scans PDF documents, if that's the question.
Okay. We have another question around, is there a standard risk assessment template that should be used?
Well, that's really what the SureShield does. There's actually, the framework is a template of all the questions, and it asks you all the questions based on the NIST 171. And all the policies are basically templates that you kind of customize once you start making the decisions. So I'm hoping that's answering your question as well. So the framework's all built in the SureShield portal, and then every company is a little bit unique, right? So if you're a knowledge-based workers, your policies and procedures are going to be different than if you're a manufacturer.
Excellent. Another question, a gentleman is asking, saying he's an MSP or their company's an MSP. If their client is a defense contractor, what levels of compliance are we as the MSP subject to?
So that's a really good question. The majority of our work comes in through the MSP channel. And what happens is we've spent a year, an enormous amount of money, time, and training and getting up to speed on this. The challenge is when I was an MSP or talking to MSPs, you may only have one or two clients that actually need this, but they got to satisfy them because they don't want somebody else coming in and them being on the outside. So the answer is if you only have one or two clients, then you can kind of transfer the responsibility to us because we're kind of certified, and just work with us, and keep the client. But if you have a pool of maybe 5 to 6 clients, you may want to start adding some certifications. But you need kind of a mass of clients to make it, have a payback. And sometimes, I know a couple MSPs I'm working with only had a couple clients, but they want to target in their area other clients, and it made sense for them to do it. So if you want, we can have a one-on-one session. I can kind of help give you some ideas and, give you some options. But again, MSPs want to have their ducks in a row, at least have a NIST 171 or so kind of controls in place, even if you're not certified.
And maybe just interpreting a little of that question, and you may know better, does an MSP need to be prepared to be CMMC compliant? I guess.
That isn't clear yet, but if you only have 1 or 2 clients, you probably want to transfer it to us. If you have 6 or so clients and you're kind of deep in the space, then you probably should want to get your own certification.
Yeah, and it would make sense also because, even if you don't have that or you're not certified, you potentially are putting that client at risk in going through that process if you don't understand that process well enough. And that's where.
Right. So that's why companies partner with us. But again, it can be so expensive to get certified for 1 or 2 clients, doesn't make sense. So if you have a critical mass, I would say go that direction. If you don't, just leverage our services.
So we have a question about whether we have a contact. I assume we probably don't at the DoD, that we can find out the level of CMMC requirement for us. I think I can probably take that. That has not been defined yet, meaning, and certainly Choice can help you with this because they can help you identify whether if you're carrying any CUI data, you are at a minimum going to be a level 2, correct, Steve?
That's correct. So if you have CUI, usually we run the scan. And if you have CUI and it shows up, and then we can drill down a little bit and look at it, we'll know if you're level 2 or not.
Yes. And to add on to that question, just for the gentleman who asked, or the person who asked, they are also, as Steve pointed out, at the level 2, if you are handling any CUI. Right now, it's a little ambiguous as to whether you're going to have to do a self-assessment, an attestment, or a accreditation, kind of like a third party, basically assessment and stamp of approval. From what we've been hearing, the majority, even though they are going to have some bifurcation there, the majority of companies that will fall into level 2 most likely will have to go through a C3PAO audit.
And we'll know in July exactly the requirements. In July, it'll be hammered out, but they're saying that it's going to be the majority of companies, something like 80,000 contractors, and they said the majority will need audits, and they'll tell us exactly in July. But I go to all the different meetings. I've attended just about every single one, and they're kind of telling us what's coming. So if you have your NIST 171 in place, you get all your evidence in place, it's not a big stretch to bring in an auditor.
And I know there was a few folks that answered initially, maybe because they're not required to, but there were a few in the first poll question that indicated that they haven't done a NIST 800-171 assessment score to the SPRS. I would say I would highly encourage you, if you haven't, if you are dealing with government contracts, and Steve, you can add to this, that you should probably go through that process of doing so.
Yeah, and the reason is you have to get a PIE number first. So if you have a PIE number, then you can go right to the site and sign up. If you don't, you have to get the PIE number first. So it can be a little tricky getting it all set up for certain companies, but we can walk you through it. We have a bulletin that we send out as well.
And then if you had done had completed a NIST 800-171 assessment and had a low score, what would be your recommendation in terms of submitting that score? Would you say, go ahead and take your chances, or maybe it's best to come back and do a little remediation work first and gap work before you go and do that? What's the risk of submitting a low score?
The risk of submitting a low score is getting a contract suspended or not getting a contract. because so what I would do is once you do the assessment, I would look for the low-hanging fruit. Like, for example, if we have a disaster recovery plan in place, it may check off 4 or 5 boxes and move that score up 20 points. If we put like some kind of auditing and logging in, if you don't have it, that could check off like 8 boxes and move it up another 30 points. So I would look for the 2 or 3 things that are low-hanging fruit that you could implement very quickly, get that score up in the positive territory, so it doesn't look, bad. That's what I would do.
Okay. And I think you did answer this question in terms of how you work with MSPs. You help if you want to speak to that again, in terms of how Choice partners with MSPs and MSSPs.
Yeah, so we have a partner program and we have a referral and reseller program. We work with them directly. We do the gap work they don't do, and we partner together to help their clients become CMMC compliant. And we can talk about that offline and one-on-one and see if it's a fit.
Right, and you said a small percentage of your, the smaller percentage of your work is directly with let's say a supplier that has a number of resources in-house that needs your assistance to help get them there, correct?
Yeah, so we've had, again, I've been in this business a long time and I've done a lot of work in the defense contractor space, and just by referral, people know us. But a lot of times they don't have an MSP and I'm referring back the MSP to make sure they have somebody. So there's a lot of back and forth referral to make sure that they have the right technical resources. We're more the analysts, and the MSP or in-house IT is doing the IT work. We kind of keep an eye on things, do the scans, kind of have a lot of back and forth to tighten things up. But usually we're more the analysts. So it's important that companies, even if they come direct, have a good technical resource. And a lot of times we're referring them resources as well.
Excellent. Well, the poll is still, I've still left the poll open. We're going to get ready to conclude the session here soon. So if those of you are still participating, if you want to go ahead on and complete answering, I see quite a few, Steve, that are interested in having you guys contact them to help them out. So that's great. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for those of you who are participating here. Again, a very important issue, as we know, and really it will be a mandatory requirement to continue on working with these types of government contracts. And as Steve also pointed out briefly, many may not be aware of this 889B issue, but that impacts things even beyond the DoD. Of course, the DoD is a government entity, so they will fall under the auspices of 889. But even if a 98% of your business is done outside the government, and you have one small, government-related contract or subcontract, you're subject to the requirements of that 889B requirement, which means you need to get that technology out of your environment if you want to continue on with that contract. So
I also be getting commercial clients asking me to run these scans. So it's pretty much every business in the United States really needs to run a scan. It's very easy to do. We're already running the vulnerability scan. We hit the button for 889B, and it's just a little added value to make sure that none of the devices are on the sanction list.
yes, and of course that's it's going to get added to. You can just assume they start in one area. You can assume we have a lot of other hostile nations out there like Russia, Iran, North Korea that we would
expect. Yeah, because Persky is on the list now, and there's some quasi companies. I don't want to say names, so I don't want to hurt the reputation, but very well-known names that have Russian ownership that it looks like they might get banned as well. So and they're common names. So I think it's just going to keep the list is going to keep growing.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Hopefully we've bought everybody back a couple of minutes, about 5 minutes of your time. We greatly appreciate you joining the session. Again, you will receive a follow-up email that will include the content of this presentation, the audio or the webinar presentation itself. And then for those of you, of course, who have asked to be contacted, you will have a personal follow-up from the folks at Choice Cybersecurity. We thank you all for your time, and we wish you the best in your business. Good cyber health, shields up, as they say. And thank you for your time today. All the best.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks everybody for attending. I know everybody has a pretty busy schedule, so thank you very much for your time.
Great. We'll go ahead and conclude the session. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.